Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of 286 Project with me, Chris Akers. On this podcast, we talk about art, culture, politics, sport, and anything else worth talking about. Now, people who've been on this podcast for long or know me outside of this will know that two of my passions are film and sports. And my next guest combines both because he's written a book called Escape, a love letter to a cult football classic. And he talks about the making and production of the film Escape to Victory with Michael Caine and Sylvester Stallone. He's here to talk to me about it now. His name's John Smith, and he's here to discuss it now. Hello, John.
Hi Chris, how you doing?
I'm good, and very well, thank you.
Thanks for having me on.
You're welcome. You're very welcome. I did enjoy his book. We'll down to it, like how the film was made and how it did, like at the box office and whatnot. But before we do, can you just explain to everyone? Because I remember watching this film when I was young, and you can understand writing a book on some sports films, especially, and this has gained cult following. But this isn't a film you see on TV a lot anymore. It used to when I was growing up, but not so much now. So, what made you decide to write of this about this film?
You say that, but I think you do. It's still sort of part of the holiday season. Channel 5 show it at least every Christmas
Okay.
and possibly every Easter as well, but certainly every Christmas. We're coming up to it now. I think Channel 5 has still got it right, so I think you'll be able to see it over Christmas if you haven't seen it beforehand. But yeah, I mean, I chose to write about it just because I've always loved the film, and I came off the back of written other books before, and they were all concerned with football autobiographies. It's like a series of three, booked, second yellow, and final third, and they were kind of all sort of the juice from over 300 football autobiographies. Wrote them, thought the fourth one, the first two I should say, I wrote with Dan Trelfer, and then the third one I wrote on my own. I thought the fourth one might be pushing my luck a little bit on the same subject, and let's step away from it. And I was just thinking about different things to write about, and there were a few ideas kind of bubbling, and the one that I couldn't shake and that I kept coming back to was Escape to Victory because it's just a film that I've loved for a really really long time, and there didn't seem to be a book like this out there about it.
So the first time I watched this film, the thing that because I didn't know what it was about at all, I just switched on the TV and it was on one day. So the first time I watched it, the thing that struck me was what are these footballers doing with Sylvester Stallone? It just seemed a very weird combination, which is why I find it a very fascinating book
Hmm.
because it answers some of my questions in regards to how all that came about. But with all films, and one thing that started off is the script.
Hmm.
So, who wrote the script and why did they decide to write it?
So a guy called Yabo Jablonski wrote the script initially, and he wrote that in the late '60s. So it was kicking around Hollywood for around 10 years before it got made. But so there had previously been a film called Two Half Times in Hell, which is a Hungarian film by a director called Zoltan Fabri, which is which is that similar sort of idea of prisoners at a football match against the Germans during wartime, and and that in itself was based on there are various stories of games like that happening. So we know that football did take place in prisoner of war camps, both German camps and British camps. So that was going on. But the idea of playing against, prisoners against their captors, maybe came from there. There are a few stories that get cited, but the one that comes up most is an incident in Kiev when like a local bakery team, which had a lot of players who had previously played for Dynamo Kiev. It was in Kiev, and they were playing, and they were invited to play a German team, and sort of legend grew around that. So then, Two Half Times in Hell plays on that, or plays with that idea, and then Yabo Jablonski kind of riffs on that with his script. Um, so in the late '60s, when he writes it, there's not much of a market for that in Hollywood. To be honest, I don't think Hollywood was sort of tripping over itself to make a football film. Other sports, sure, but soccer, no traction in America at that point. So the script goes around for a number of years, really, goes through a few different producers, passes through the odd actor's hands, and and then it arrives at the producer Freddie Field's door, and by that time, Pele, and I think Pele is the absolute catalyst for this being made. Pele had been playing in America for a few years by that point for New York Cosmos. So at that point, Freddie Fields then suddenly sees that, oh well, there might be something in this if we can combine this script with a couple of top line actors and Pele bringing his star quality to it, we now might be able to get this something away. So then it kicks into gear late 70s and they film it in 1980. Comes out in 1981.
Okay. So that happens, and then obviously once you get the script and that's improved, that approved, you then gotta get a director attached to it.
Hmm.
And what surprised me, and I didn't know until reading the book, was the director, John Huston.
Hmm.
How on earth did he get involved? Because that's a big Hollywood name, and he actually went on to further success afterwards.
Absolutely. I mean, John Huston's like Hollywood royalty, isn't he? He comes from that the family Walter Houston before him, Angelica Houston after him, and it's just one of those names like the Barrymores or Fairbanks or whatever. It's like a legitimate old Hollywood royalty name, isn't it?
Mhm.
And he'd made great films like Treasure of Sierra Madre and Maltese Falcon and African Queen and as well as The Man Who Would Be King, which he obviously made with Michael Caine
Mhm.
a few years before. And I think that might have been one of the reasons why it seemed attractive to him, the idea of working with Michael Caine again. So through my reading, the only other director, sorry, who seems to have been attached to it for any length of time was a guy called Brian Hutton, who was a director of a couple of really good war films in Where Eagles Dare and Kelly's Heroes.
Yeah.
So Brian Hutton is attached to it for a while, and that seems like quite a good fit. And then at some point around 6 months or in the year before it goes into production, suddenly John Huston comes into frame. And like I say, he might have been attracted by the presence of Michael Caine. He might have been interested because it was something different. I spoke to Clive Merrison, the actor who's in it, who's in Escape to Victory, plays the Forger, and he got on really well with John Huston, and he very much felt that it was a money project for John Huston because he had this labour of love, and he was trying to make the Dead James Joyce story, and which he then got to make in like 1986 or 87, I think. But so at that point, John Huston was trying to take money jobs basically in order to fund his labour of love. So like the project he does after Escape to Victory is Annie, which seems equally incongruous, right?
Yeah.
It seems odd that he's made this football war film, but then it just seems as odd that he's made Annie afterwards. And I think from the producer's point of view, as soon as John Huston says he might be interested in your project, then I think you go with John Huston for your project.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of the story behind the Island Dr. Moreau, which I won't go into, but he was scrappy, and eventually it's John Frankenheimer of all people.
Yes, of
But I
course.
think
Yeah.
he got like a 2 or 3. He done it because he got a 2 or 3 year picture deal after that to do his own films, even though the production at that point, even when he came in, was so chaotic. So did John Huston, I imagine, did he do something similar? I know you say it's like a money job, but was
Hmm.
something similar in place where they said, okay, I'll do this if I get this? Was it that negotiation, or couldn't you find anything to that regard?
I didn't come across anything directly for that. Yeah, so I don't know if Escape to Victory was sort of directly tied to him making The Dead. I know that he was working towards making The Dead, and he makes a few films in between. But yeah, I guess he was on that path, and it would have been it certainly would have been in his interests to sort of stay relevant as well and stay in with the because Freddie Fields was a big Hollywood mover and shaker at that point. So yeah, maybe it was.
So how did Michael Caine get involved?
So through Freddie Fields approached him, and you can see why they would have gone to him. So Sylvester Stallone, obviously, Freddie Fields gave him the script, when Sylvester Stallone came to buy a property that Freddie Fields had on the beach in LA. And he managed to get the script to him. Sylvester Stallone was interested. You can see the appeal of Sylvester Stallone in a sports film, right? But then obviously it also requires a bit of gravitas and a British star to play the captain. So yeah, Michael Caine's approached, and I think, like I say, I think so. Freddie Fields gets Michael Caine involved, and it seems that Michael Caine is on board before John Huston. So John Huston might have been attracted by Michael Caine because of the Man Who Would Be King connection.
Yeah, I was gonna say because Sylvester Stallone, I know he did obviously the Rocky movies and what.
Hmm.
When was this point? Because I don't think he'd done Rambo yet, unless I'm
No, he
mistaken.
hadn't. He hadn't. So yeah, so just on Michael Caine. So Michael Caine's coming off the back of a couple of stinkers at this point, really, in like Beyond the Poseidon Adventure and The Swarm. So it's not kind of a great period for him. And Michael Caine's always, let's say, it's a fairly scattergun approach, right? He's got a lot of classics in there, but he's also got a few duffers. So it seems like if you could interest Michael Caine, um, if something takes his fancy, then he'll come on board, and that seems to have been the case with Escape to Victory. With Stallone, so obviously he'd blown big with Rocky a few years before, and then he was in a slightly tricky position because the only significant hit he'd had since was Rocky 2. So he'd made a film called Fist, and he'd made Paradise Alley in the meantime, and neither of them had gone well at all. And then Rocky 2 he does, and then suddenly Rocky 2 does really well. So it's clear that audiences want to see him as Rocky. And if he had a slight reluctance to only ever do Rocky, certainly you can see why there would have been a comfort in coming back to a sports film, at least.
How much of an influence did the North American Soccer League have in the studio to decide to greenlight the project?
Well, I think indirectly and directly it had a big effect. Like I say, I think the NASL had been going for a little while at that point, and Pele was its biggest star. You had stars playing over there like Franz Beckenbauer, Johan Cruyff, Bobby Moore, who's obviously also in the film. George Best went over, so they're attracting these huge stars, and there's the glitz and the glamour of it. So that's certainly raised the profile of football in the country. And then you've got the direct influence of Warner Brothers are heavily involved in New York Cosmos. And then they're also involved in the film as well. So you can see there's that direct link as well. It's a showbiz club, and Pele's right in the middle of it, and you can see why these opportunities sort of fall on top of each other.
How many football slash soccer films have there been before Escape to Victory? Because I can't think of many.
Not many, certainly no Hollywood ones, I don't think. I think that this might be Hollywood's sort of first dipping their toe in. Obviously, you've got like the Arsenal Stadium mystery from the 30s that was made over here. You got two half times in hell that was Hungarian. There's really not very many until that point because there just wouldn't have been the appetite for it. There's a few more British ones, I guess. Yesterday's Hero is the Ian McShane one is a bit before this, but they're certainly few and far between until this comes along. And I think that it's a real sweet spot. It's a real small window in which this film would have been made because I think it needs that NASL presence. I think it needs Pele's star power to get anybody interested in this. You're still in that period when people are making war films. War films are still popular. So, and I think the combination of a war film with football, I mean, it's like The Great Escape with football would have been the top line sort of selling point for it. And I think it's like a really small window in which this film could or would have been made, which is one of the things that's always fascinated me about it.
Yeah, it doesn't seem there doesn't seem to be in that many football films even since. Like
No,
Bend It Like Beckham comes to mind, but other than that, and Goal, I think the Goal series, other than
yes,
those two,
yeah.
I
There's a
can't.
there's a few. In one of the chapters in the book, I sort of rattle through a few of the alternatives, kind of, if Escape to Victory is not the greatest football film, then what is? And have a little bit of fun with that. But yeah, there's really not many. It's not a genre that's exploded. Certainly not compared to boxing or baseball or sports, which I mean obviously are more popular in America, but I guess also are easier to film as well,
Mhm.
easier to recreate certainly than football.
How were the footballers chosen? I think from the book, Freddie Fields had a big part to play in that, but how much did he actually know about not just the players to choose, but obviously when you put it on a screen, they have to have that certain charisma to it. So how would you go about like going and doing that?
Yeah, well, I think a recurring theme on this film is that if people don't know something, they're happy to get somebody involved who knows more than them. So you got Freddie Fields who takes on the project and is sort of the catalyst for getting it made, getting Pele involved. That gets the funding, gets it away. So Pele is obviously the first one to sign on. He's pivotal to it all. Then from Pele you get Bobby Moore, who the two were really close friends. Bobby Moore is recently retired. He's been retired. He went to play in America. Been retired a couple of years at that point, maybe. Um,
Mhm.
excuse me. So that brings Bobby Moore on board, and obviously Bobby Moore is he kind of fits the character description a little bit for Michael Caine's character in that Colby, Michael Caine's character, is described as captain of West Ham and played for England, and is a defender, and he's blonde as well, and is this sort of British hero. So then you got Bobby Moore who kind of fits that mold as well. So Pele gets Bobby Moore involved. Bobby Moore then clearly thinks, well, this is an opportunity to get a friend involved. Who do I want to spend a couple of months with in Hungary? And he approaches Mike Summerby, who's like a Man City legend, and the two of them played for England together, and they were great friends. So he gets Mike Summerby involved. But then what Freddie Fields does is Freddie Fields is enthusiastic about it, but doesn't know a lot about football. So what he does, he then employs a guy called Peter Mason as his football consultant, who arguably in the grand scheme of things doesn't know a lot more about football than Freddie Fields, but it's all comparative. He leans on this guy Peter Mason, but what their thinking was obviously the team needs to be largely European to fit the story. So what they want to do then is gather players from a number of different countries so that it will improve the audience in those countries. So
Mhm.
then they get Halvard Todderson, who was the Norway captain at that point. They get Søren Lindsted, who's a Danish player who was a friend and teammate of Halvard Todderson at FC Twente. They get Paul van Himst, who was a Belgian legend. They get Co Prins, who's Dutch. Um, and then they get the Ipswich guys, which I'm sure we'll come on to. And then the slight anomaly to all that is Ozzy Ardiles as well. Ozzy Ardiles comes on board, and Ozzy Ardiles at that point is at the sort of peak of his powers. He's won the World Cup 2 years before, and yet here he is getting involved in this. Um, oh, you got Kazimierz Stainer as well, who was Poland captain and was playing for Man City at the time. He comes on board. And then, as far as the Ipswich players are concerned, Peter Mason had a friendship with Bobby Robson, who was Ipswich manager at the time. Ipswich were one of the top teams in the country at that point, constantly sort of top three, four, five teams in the country. Were in Europe, had won the FA Cup not long before, were a year off of winning the UEFA Cup. Bobby Robson invites Peter Mason down to the training ground. Um, he's invited in, he talks to the players, he explains the project, he says who wants to come and play football and be extras in a film for a month or 6 weeks. And whoever put their hand up went. And then there's seven Ipswich players who get involved to varying degrees. You've got Russell Osman, John Walk, Kevin O'Callaghan, who are all sort of part of the team and play a big part. Then you've got Laurie Civil and Robin Turner, who play for the German side in the
Mhm.
game at the end. And then you've got Kevin Beattie, who was Michael Caine's body double for a lot of the football, and you got Paul Cooper, who was nominally Sylvester Stallone's body double, and was also coaching him on set as well.
Yeah.
Mm.
What are any, what I don't know if you're researching the book, but um which footballers were lined up to star in the film but couldn't in the end?
Well, there's a few that get mentioned. Um, I was pleased to see that George Best's name came up because I sort of asked everybody, who do you think do you know of anybody who was due to be in it and then couldn't do it? And I kind of had at the back of my mind that they might that George Best might come up because you think at that time he's sort of pretty much finished at the top level, but was this wonderful player, had spent time in America, is obviously a good-looking guy with loads of charisma. You would have thought he was made for it, but and his name did come up in reports that I read, George Best and Dennis Law. And I think Dennis Law would have been great, but maybe at some point somebody somewhere thought that George Best might be a little bit unreliable. Obviously he's well documented problems, and if you're trying to make a film on a tight schedule, then maybe that's not an element you wanna bring into it.
Mm-hmm.
But so there were those two. The Danish player Alan Simonsen, who had been European Footballer of the Year in '78, I think. His name is mentioned, and he's involved until quite late, I think, and then that falls away. And then other than that, you've got obviously anybody who was at Ipswich could have been could have been involved if they wanted to. And there's one or two that were away at the European Championships that summer. Paul Mariner and Franz Tyson were away, but anybody else could have been asked. So Alan Brazil, I've heard him talk about being asked. Eric Gates, Arnold Muir, any of those guys could have stepped up if they'd wanted to get involved. Um, Also, who else was there? Oh yeah, the other opportunity was that Scotland were on an Eastern European tour. They played Poland and they played Hungary. So this goes right up to the point where they're in Hungary. The rest of the guys are in Hungary ready to film. And they're obviously still a little bit short of players or still on the lookout to add to the numbers because they also ask these anybody from the Scotland squad if they want to get involved. So then Alan Brazil was in that squad and would have got a second, was asked a second time. And I've seen Alan Ruff talk about it, um, the goalkeeper, and Alex McLeish talk about it as well, about how they might have got involved. But interestingly, both of them had their own sort of slight brushes with film because Alan Ruff coached Dee Hepburn from Gregory's Goal ahead of that. So Alan Ruff and Partick, she went and trained with Partick Thistle, so he was involved in that a little bit. And then Alex McLeish is even sweeter. Alex McLeish actually makes it into a film. He makes it into Stan and Ollie. He's just in a background scene. I think he's in like a hotel lobby, and because John S. Baird, the director, was an Aberdeen fan, and that's where Alex McLeish spent most of his career, if not all of it. Yeah, he invited Alex McLeish along, and Alex McLeish is in the background in Stan and Ollie.
Interesting to say about McLeish. When did that film come out? Stan and Ollie? How many years
Stan
ago?
and Ollie is, I don't know, it's 2010s, isn't it? It's probably about 10 years old, maybe.
Yeah. The reason I ask is, and it's interesting to talk about McLeish because I think some of it was filmed in Birmingham at the
Oh,
old
really?
theatre. And I think McLeish was still managing in Birmingham at the time.
Oh, okay. There you go. Then that would
Minor
explain it.
Birmingham
Yeah.
sitting in Villa. So that might be how that came about
Good.
in that sense.
Yeah.
But But yeah, I mean that's really interesting. Like, and also one thing I did suppose about the book is managers didn't really seem to disapprove of this because this would have had to have been filmed during the summer, like close to pre-season and whatnot. Especially if you're a club like Ipswich, who didn't use a lot of players, it kind of surprises me that Bobby Robson was a little bit almost laissez-faire. So yeah, go ahead, like
Yeah.
no regard to whether they get injured or not.
Yeah, I completely agree. Somebody said to me that they think that I write about sort of the idiosyncrasies about football that couldn't happen now, maybe, or the things that seem alien to us, compared to the modern game. And I think there's an element of truth in that with this film, because I just don't think that happens now. I mean, for Ipswich to send, as you say, it was smaller squads then, so they're basically sending off half their squad to go and play football on sandy pitches in army boots for for 6 weeks, and they're all just trusted to do it, and also, let's face it, quite a boozy few weeks away as well.
Mm.
But there's no question of managers not allowing it. There's no question of insurance being a problem, which you imagine would be a nightmare now. I just couldn't see it happening because of that. But yeah, Bobby Robson's happy to see them go. Like I say, Torreson and Linstead were both from FC Twente, so their manager must have been okay with it. And I know a few of them were recently retired, so Bobby Moore, Summerby, Paul Van Himst, Coprins are all recently retired, but the rest are all current, Pele, obviously, and then the rest are all current players. So they're all still at it and at the peak of their powers. In fact, John Walk does get injured. John Walk did get injured in filming the game, so reported back for pre-season injured and missed the first few weeks of pre-season, which I guess Bobby Robson wouldn't have been delighted about, but it doesn't seem to have done anybody any harm, because John Walk then scored sort of 35 goals that season from midfield, I think, and they go on to win the UEFA Cup. So certainly there's no harm done. Certainly.
Indeed, indeed. Um, just wondering, Sylvester Stallone, obviously he plays a goalkeeper. I don't know how much he knew about sport beforehand, because he mentions in the book that he didn't think it'd be as bad the training, but he seems to have been really roughed up by not just the training but doing those scenes as well.
Mm. So he knew next to nothing. I mean, he's quite a sporty guy. He played football, and I think he's into polo. I don't know if you've seen that recent documentary about him. He played a bit of polo. So he's a sort of naturally sporty guy, and obviously he's got the experience of making the Rockies. Um, but yeah, he knew next to nothing about football, but he's willing to give it a go. So he turns up, and he has some coaching before filming with Gordon Banks, um, in preparation for the role. And then, as I say, on set, he's got Paul Cooper coaching him. And Paul Cooper was also supposed to do a lot of double work for him, but he said that Stallone was keen to do as much of it as he absolutely could. So he's happy to muck in and throw himself around. And in the camp, there's a lovely story about Pele taking penalties against him, Stallone being a little bit arrogant about it and saying, "Well, obviously, I'm going to say these penalties," and not the only one he gets near breaks his finger, I think, on his way through the net to smash a window behind him. Um, but yeah, he mucks in, he throws himself around, he gets injured quite a lot on it. He's got shoulder injuries, rib injuries, hand injuries, all sorts. But he's quite happy to get on with it.
And in the book, did you mention about Marco Caine and his footballing skills as well?
Well, I think an enthusiastic amateur would be the way to describe it. I think he talks to them in interviews about the film. He talks about having played as a kid, and certainly he likes his football, and certainly he would have played as a youngster. But by the time it comes to filming Escape to Victory, I think he's 47, and Russell Osman, who I interviewed, so I interviewed all the players for the book, and Russell Osman said, yeah, he wasn't up to much. He didn't do very much. He was far more happy to let Kevin Beattie be his body double. So anything that's neck down or from a distance is Kevin Beattie. And Michael Caine said he did get involved at one point and pulled a muscle very quickly. So I think he was mostly happy to sort of sit on the sideline and do what he had to do, obviously, but then for the rest of it, sit on the sideline and let Kevin Beattie double for him.
Well, obviously, we mentioned Marco Caine and Sylvester Stallone as the two main actors in this film. Which of our main actors starred in this?
Sorry.
which other actors starred in
Which
this?
other actors? So you got so the other main part is the German officer von Steiner, and that is Max von Sydow. Sydow or Sudov? I've heard some people say Sudov, but I've
I say
always
sit down.
tend to say Sydow. Yeah, Max von Sydow. And he's a interesting case because I found an interview with him in which he was talking about obviously he's blonde and European and of a certain age where when he crosses over from those Ingmar Bergman films to Hollywood, um, there are a lot of war films being made and there's a lot of offers to play German officers on the table. And on this in this onset interview that I found, he said he'd always batted them away. He was always keen not to be typecast as a German officer. Um, but Escape to Victory intrigued him enough that he wanted to do it. You know, I think the lure of John Huston. I think he also liked his football. The players said that he was always keen to hang around with them, particularly the Scandinavians in Torresson and Linstead, and he was intrigued enough to come aboard. And I think that him and Michael Caine sort of really ground the film because obviously it's it's a flight of fantasy. It could be, it could be seen as a bit daft at times, but I think you've got two really good performances in there from Michael Caine and Max von Sydow that really sort of ground it.
Yeah, cool. So who was on the German side? Because it wasn't just all footballers, is that correct? Like when they did that big match?
So you got Laurie Civil, who was an Ipswich goalkeeper, and he's in goal. Robin Turner is another player from Ipswich. He's playing out on pitch. Then largely it's local Hungarian players who were playing for MTK, which is the club whose home stadium the game's filmed in. So there are a lot of them. And then the role of the captain is played by a guy called Werner Roth, who I confess I didn't appreciate until probably until I started researching this book. Actually, he was New York Cosmos captain back in the day. I knew he was an actual footballer, but I didn't appreciate what level he was in. He was an American international, and yeah, he's captain of New York Cosmos. And if you're captain of New York Cosmos when Pele and Carlos Alberto and Franz Beckenbauer are all playing there, then you must be doing something right, right? So Werner Roth gets involved um, through Pele and partly through those Warner Brothers connections at New York Cosmos as well. And he takes on this role of the German captain. But there was another part that he wanted. He's in a slight exception to the rest of the footballers in that he did see this as an opportunity and he was quite keen to give acting a go. So he jumped at the chance of doing this and he was kind of shown a script and asked which part he wanted. And initially he picked a different part. Um, but then John Huston managed to talk him into taking the part of the German captain, and he kind of sold him on it by saying, "There's going to be this shot at the end, and in the frame, it's just going to be you and Stallone, and you and Stallone, and nothing else, just you two head to head," which I really like because it puts him sort of in good company with all those guys he fought in the Rocky films.
Yeah, it's like I said, there's a huge cast, not just of famous footballers, but obviously like famous actors as well.
Mm.
How much was it? 12 million it cost to make, is that correct?
That sounds about right. Yes, yeah, I did read that figure. Yeah.
Yeah, that seems a lot for that film of that particular ilk, or was that
I
average?
don't think it was. It went. I mean, filming in Hungary saved them a lot. They sort of built a camp just outside of Budapest. Um, so filming there saved them a bit of money. I mean, obviously, John Huston, Sylvester Stallone, Michael Caine, Pele aren't going to come cheap. I don't think many of the rest of the players earned a great deal out of it. It would have obviously have been enough to make it worth their while to spend their summer doing that instead of going on holiday. But it did overrun slightly, so that might have added to the costs a bit.
Yeah. How did it do in America when it was released, and which films was it up against around that time that
So there's a real split. So it comes out summer of '81. So in America, it's up. Raiders of the Lost Ark's a big one, and The Empire Strikes Back, I think, is out that summer as well. Um, and there's a real split between America and Europe. So in America, it is kind of considered a flop. It didn't make a great deal of money in America. But in Europe, it did sort of keep its end up. It's maybe down to that strategy of selecting players from all these different countries. It meant it had a kind of a built-in audience all around Europe. So it did well in European cinemas. It did well in the UK. It was up again when it came out in the UK. It was up against Excalibur. Excalibur was the big other release that week. Um, and yeah, so it is a real split, which is kind of it seems a shame because it's kind of what you would have thought going into it. You would have thought if we're making a film about football, then it's not going to play well in America, but it will play well in Europe. And then they go to all this effort, and then that is pretty much how it plays out. And in America, it's regarded as a flop. So Stallone regards it as a flop, but Michael Caine regards it as a success. Michael Caine lists it as something that he bounced back from those films that I mentioned earlier, The Swarm and I think The Hand and Beyond the Poseidon Adventure, and he sees Escape to Victory as part of his next run of good films, which is that and Death Trap and I can't remember what else. Maybe the Brian De Palma one, Dressed to Kill, is it? Yeah, maybe that. He definitely sees Escape to Victory as a bit of a success, and that's so you can sort of massage the figures how you want. Because if you want to talk about Europe, then you can talk about it as a success. But if you're talking about America, then no, you would have to consider it a flop. To be fair.
did they do a publicity tour to promote the film, national, both in America and in England? And if so, how did that go?
Yeah, they did. They did. Werner Ross says that he was called upon to do a bit and go to festivals and turn up. And Pele obviously does his bit, and Sylvester Stallone um, does his bit. There's a really nice appearance that they did that Pele and Sylvester Stallone turn up at half time at the soccer bowl, um, which is, as you imagine, it's the Super Bowl of the NASL. It's the final game of the season, and yeah, they devoted half time to Pele and Sylvester Stallone to promote the film, which is really nice. It's really nice. I think you can still see it on YouTube. It's really nice bit
Okay.
of business.
I was going to say, it makes me think that if it was a flop in America, that's probably the reason why they didn't do any more um, football themed films since then, actually, because even with the MLS that came out when that was established in the mid 90s and it's done relatively well, there
Mm.
hasn't been any, even lead up to this World Cup, no soccer related goals. Goal possibly, it may be
Yeah,
US and UK production, but everything else, like, no,
yeah.
nothing. No.
I mean, I guess Gold must have done well enough because they then made the sequels, right? I think it was always intended to be three films, but it's very much run out of steam by the third film. But I guess it must have done well enough for the first one to make the second one. But yeah, I mean, it's not like Escape to Victory suddenly kicks off a revolution of suddenly there's other football films. There's one or two that Pele gets involved in. There's a couple of other attempts to sort of trade on his star power and put his name above the door of a couple of films. But yeah, nothing that really hits in America at all.
Sometimes when you get these cult films, there's like other actors or directors who says, "Oh yes, I used to like this when I was growing up and younger." It, is this a case of Escape to Victory? Are there any like people from the film who surprisingly are fans of this film?
Um, that I don't know. That I couldn't tell you actually. What celebrity do you mean? Celebrities who
Yeah,
profess
celebrities and
themselves
even
fans of
like
it?
especially if we're in the film world, because sometimes when you get these cult films, I say,
Hmm.
actually, I do like this, or they'll pick some obscure film that they'd like, which no one's heard of, and they like. I'm just wondering if there was like a similar thing with this film.
Oh, I see. I don't know about amongst actors and sort of the film community. I know it's a favorite amongst footballers.
Mhm.
So
Were the celebrities? also the footballers that were in the film when it came out and it did okay in the UK,
Hmm.
did their status increase as a result? Were they getting like more interviews on Match of the Day, more like invites to talk shows and whatnot, even if it's for a brief period?
Well, it's kind of not really. Kind of not really. It doesn't have a much of an impact in that way. I wouldn't have said. But interestingly, going back to the America Europe split, when I spoke to Werner Roth, the American who plays the German captain, he said he very rarely gets spoken to about the film at all. He's happy to talk about it, but occasionally he'll get of quite a niche film festival will want to talk to him. But they're rare occasions. Whereas over here, obviously, there's a bit more interest. But Russell Osman says that there was like a real drop off. Although it comes out in 1981, it's on TV. I first watched it on video, which I sort of talk about in the first chapter of the book. Sort of how I came to it. It's first on TV in 1984, but then it kind of falls out of fashion and doesn't get talked about a lot. Obviously, as a kid, I'm not aware of whether it's in fashion or not. It's a film that I really loved and watch again and again and again. I can remember me and my brother watching it endlessly, particularly the match itself. Um, but it doesn't really get attention until the 90s.
Okay.
Sort of mid 90s, it gets a sort of regeneration because of, I guess, because of that lad culture, because you've got Loaded and well, probably Loaded way ahead of FHM, I guess, but that kind of thing, and 442 football magazine, and like there's a real kind of men's magazine, or men or not. Obviously, 442 is for anybody who's interested in football, but Total Sport and whatever, they're going for a certain market. At that point, there's a big boom in magazines, and there's certainly the odd article about fantasy football then, and Russell Osman says then is when the interest kicked in. So they would be approached then, and if you read those articles, then all of those guys seem to get asked about it. You get sort of where are they now kind of articles um, about it, and you get Russell Osman, Mike Summerby, Kevin O'Callaghan, all those guys will crop up in these articles. When they did fantasy football in the 90s, Frank Skinner and David Baddiel in that, obviously that set that's decorated with Subbuteo pitches and any number of flags and rosettes and whatever. There's an Escape to Victory poster up on the wall there, so it's a sign that it's sort of having a moment, I guess, in the zeitgeist of the time, and it which you can see, right, because it's war and it's football, so you can see why it would have fit those times, that sort of lad culture. And then since then, I would say it's been pretty solidly part of the culture. It was on television certainly a lot more since then. It will occasionally be. It was often repackaged around World Cups. You'd get a new video or DVD release would come out with sort of England branding on it, to give it a push, which I've always found odd because obviously the nature of the team in Escape to Victory is that it's this allies team. It is this sort of pan-European and pan-European plus team, really, because you got Aussie and Pele in it. But it's yeah, but it does kind of get these jingoistic, um, increasingly England flag related releases around the World Cup to give it a push.
Okay. Yeah. Certainly interesting. And it's good that you've talked about that in terms of how it got into TV in the first place, because
Mm.
it, when we were talking just beforehand, it seems to happen around Christmas, and
Mm.
it's not really a Christmas film, so it seems to have found its niche.
But I guess, sorry, go on, finish.
No, I was going to say, I was just saying, it seems to have found its niche at Christmas for whatever reason.
Yeah. But I guess you would also say the same with The Great Escape as well, right? There's nothing Christmas, there's nothing intrinsically Christmas about The Great Escape, and yet I would probably associate that with watching it at Christmas, whether it was on a Christmas Day or a Boxing Day when I was a kid. It feels like it would come up all the time. Oh, like Bond films, I guess we associate Bond films with Christmas Day, don't we? After lunch, sleeping off sleeping off the Christmas dinner in front of a Bond film, right? So I guess it's like that. I guess it kind of falls into that. That it's not obviously it's not a Christmas film, but that seems to be in recent years where it's found its place. I think you might still see it in a on a summer bank holiday or Easter bank holiday, but it's been a constant in the Christmas schedules the last few years for sure.
Yeah, it seems to have made an impact on us. I do remember watching it as a kid and just not know, just flicking the TV on, not knowing what this film was, and thinking, how on earth of, I mean, not even just the footballers, but Michael Caine and Sylvester Stallone, especially where their careers were at the time, didn't
Hmm.
seem the obvious pairing, although it does work.
Hmm. Yeah, well, this is it for me. I mean, like I say, I talk about it in the first chapter about how I came to it and finding it in the video shop, sort of early days of us having a VHS player at home, and the video shop was like this wonderland of opportunities, and you'd go around there and there's all these covers and film posters up everywhere, and I can remember seeing Escape to Victory on the shelf, and you've got Michael Caine, who I would have known from a few films at that point, probably that I'd watched with my dad, maybe The Eagle Has Landed, maybe Zulu, those kind of things, and Sylvester Stallone, who I definitely knew from the Rocky films, and then Pele's in the middle of it. So that's kind of your starting point. What on earth is Pele? Even as a kid, obviously you know who Pele is. If you're vaguely interested in football, you know who Pele is. So if it's your starting point is it's the Great Escape plus football, I'm in. You've got Michael Caine, Sylvester Stallone, and Pele, I'm in, and then you find out that Bobby Moore's in it, and I'm in even more. And then that was probably sort of the base level as a kid, and then as I've gone on and watched it more and more, and over the years, obviously you then go, well, hang on, that's John Walk. I saw him, I watched him playing the other day. Oh, and that's Russell Osman, and you come to learn who all the other players are
Yeah.
and all these stories that come with it and how that came together. Ozzy Ardiles obviously was a huge star throughout the 80s. So the idea that there's this film where Ozzy Ardiles is doing, rainbow flicks and Pele's doing overhead kicks in the middle of a war film was just magical, really.
Yeah, indeed. What happened to Freddie Fields after this film? Because it was very influential in terms of trying to get footballers in particular to star in the film. What happened to him after this film was released?
So he does go on. He was an agent, primarily an agent beforehand, and then uh, Escape to Victory is a real crossover for him in terms of a producer. But and then he's a Hollywood producer he's sadly no longer with us, but he's a Hollywood producer then for the next 10, 15 years. Um, yeah, and he's considered he's probably still remembered more as like the first super agent, and he was agent to people like Paul Newman and Barbara Streisand and Steve McQueen, I think, people like that back in the day. And he's one thing, obviously it predates Escape to Victory, but one thing I found really interesting that he's credited with is, on this is something that I've heard Mark Kermode talk about quite a lot, but on the Tower in Inferno, you've got Paul Newman and Steve McQueen. Um,
Yeah, the being on a poster. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So on the poster, so who on earth are you putting first on that poster? So the idea that if anybody's top left, then they're the star, right? So they go, one of them's bottom left and one of them's top right, or that, as you're looking at me, and and evidently he invented that. So he's a real Hollywood player for years to come, but it's Escape to Victory that is that crossover into production.
Although not a movie star, Pele is obviously well known. I've always wanted to try to get him. So where you talked there about the poster for Tower Inferno, was there something similar for Pele in terms of his name had to be really associated with this and be up in lights and whatnot?
I don't think so. Not from his part. I don't think. I certainly don't think there was any kind of ego from him that he was insisting on anything. I think everybody speaks really well of him. I think for him, it was just an adventure. He'd not long finished playing. Obviously, there were opportunities. Obviously, he'd starred in TV shows in Brazil. He'd had records out and whatever. And I think it was just another thing. I think it was just another offer for him. He's like, sure, yeah, I'll go and do that. And and yeah, it's just an adventure for him. So certainly, I don't think there was anything from him in terms of wanting to be the biggest star or center of the poster or whatever. I guess it just kind of makes sense to give him equal billing with the other two in terms of, global superstar. There probably wasn't. It's probably only Muhammad Ali who was a rival in terms of stature in sport at that time. And then you got these two big movie stars alongside him. But yeah, there doesn't seem to be much sort of jockeying for position or insisting on certain positions or conditions at all. Not really.
Okay, cool. And just quickly, obviously mentioning you, this is another book that you've written.
Hmm.
Is your next book going to be a football themed book? And if so, would we be able to talk a bit more about that?
I don't know. I definitely haven't got a solid idea yet. I've got a few sort of vague ideas that I'm playing with. That I think that an effort to get this done, and I think in the new year I might kind of look into exploring other possibilities. But there's nothing solid yet. Certainly nothing that I could share at the moment. Certainly.
Well, if people want to find out more about your work and your previous books, where can they go?
So the previous books are called Booked, The Gospel According to Our Football Heroes. Second Yellow, The Further Adventures of Our Football Heroes, and Final Third, The Final Word or The Last Word on Our Football Heroes. And as I say, they were all about hopefully funny books about footballers' autobiographies, kind of shared stories, what brings them together, what sets people apart. Like I say, the idiosyncrasies that seem out of step with modern football. And now you've got Escape as well. So I've got an author page on Amazon. If people want to find me on social media, I am at very popular name on everything. Because being called John Smith, obviously you're going to struggle to find
Yeah.
John Smith in it. But yeah, so I'm at very popular name on X and Instagram and Blue Sky and Threads and all of those things. Um, so yeah, you'd be able to find me on there, and all four of the books have come out through Pitch Publishing so far. So yeah, thanks to them. But yeah, you can find all the books on there certainly.
I'll leave a link to Pitchy Publishing's website
Thank you.
on this book so you can in the description so people can click on that and purchase a book. John, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. It was a
Thank
film
you.
I'd watched as a kid. I didn't know how the footballers were hired and how they came together, but it's really fascinating read. So thank you very much and thank you for coming on to the 286 project.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Chris. Cheers. Thank you. See you again.